right. So this is an extension of the discussion that we had about the viewpoints the last time. And so what I decided to do is to review quickly what I was saying last time, which was all right as far as it went, I think, but rather abstract. And then I want to contrast it with something else, which I'll get to at the end. So let me begin by looking at the slides for a few minutes that I had used before, which is again about viewpoints, and these slides are focusing on the visual um, ways that we register different viewpoints, but they are more general than that. It's just that visual allows you to make comments about certain situations, such as this little drawing here, which, if it's looked at from one side, would be 4 bits of lumber, and if it's looked at from the other side, would be 3 bits of lumber. And then there is a cartoon here where these fellows are arguing over whether it's 3 or 4. But of course, we have here the advantage of a larger viewpoint. And in the larger viewpoint, we see it's a certain structure which can be seen as 4 or 3. And that would be wonderfully enlightening if we could take a larger viewpoint on many conflicts. But the question is, how do you get to a larger viewpoint? And that's what I did not discuss in these slides. And we keep asking that question. But I want to go through the slides anyway, because they show some principles in the matter. The person who is concentrated on the right-hand viewpoint actually finds that his viewpoint spreads to the entire world, just as long as he ignores certain change or singularity or difference that happens over here. And it is true of the situation on the other side as well. Mr. Four, look, our fourness spreads over his entire world as long as he ignores something that is apparently distant from him. So, so this is kind of characteristic of how our points of view actually become points of view on the whole world. And that whole world may have multiple points of view that are available to it. It always does. So that's the comment that was being made on that slide. And then I said, you can think about that in terms of dynamics, in the sense that a given viewpoint or person is in a kind of a well, and the person with the other viewpoint is in a different kind of well, and those wells are maybe mutually available like this, but you would have to climb up out of one well in order to get down into the other well, unless the situation changed in such a way that it became possible to just slide off into the other. And there's an old mathematical theory that was popularized, not so old, but popularized back in the 80s, called catastrophe theory due to Rene Thom, which looked at the topology and the differential geometry of such situations. And it's actually a very useful theory, but it got kind of over popularized, and then it kind of disappeared as things do. But the ideas of that dynamics are good, because you can make a global picture of how these shifts of possible dynamics can fit together. So it's worth thinking about that. Context again. And then there is the fact that the landscape of transition from one point of view to another, which I've been drawing in front of us for the last few slides, may be quite invisible to the observers. So you go back and forth between the 2 points of view of vases and faces, or front and back of cube, but you have no visual system access to a transition that is going on that takes you from one viewpoint to another. You get the end result, and then you get another end result. And you can introspect on that and try to see what you can see. People have done that, but anyway, it is true that very often the landscape of transition is hidden to us, or maybe we don't even know if it exists. The viewpoint can be quite coherent and yet imaginary. For example, here in the Kinesa triangle, There's no white triangle there. You made it. Your neurology, your brain, your system created a triangle here out of three Pac-Men. And if you change their orientations, the geometry of the triangle changes. There is no two-dimensional sphere here. And other kinds of, well, we live in a world of our constructs and our perceptions, and we construct imaginary entities that are real for us. And there are good examples of quite vivid ones, like the Penrose Triangle, which certainly looks to the eye, to the mind, to be real. But if you were to cover part of that drawing, then you see it's a realistic drawing up to a point, and then it takes off, and this would have to be higher than the other. But that you could say, well, that's where it goes wrong, but that's not where it goes wrong. It could have gone wrong here at the other vertex, and it's still fine. Could have gone wrong at the other vertex. All possible wrongs, but you remove your insight into where it went wrong, and you're back at an entity that seems real nonetheless. So there are local and global influences that help us construct apparently real structures that are logically contradictory. And then I talked about some other examples and some other ideas, but the main point was to think about viewpoints in terms of constructions where we ourselves can see the multiplicity in the viewpoints, and also the kinds of fundamental resistances to shifting the viewpoint that are there in the perceptual system, in the thought system, in the way of being that we have. And that's a quick review of what I was talking about. But then
could I interrupt?
no, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
Yeah,
you
had a question
there. Okay.
All right. So what I want to do now for a moment is just shift to another person's point of view on this same problem. And then you see, and he's quite strong in the way he expressed it, but everyone expresses the same point of view. They would say my remarks, they would say, well, that's all fine in the abstract, but we're confronted with the realities of these situations. So they would say something like that. Now, here's the comment. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. This is a comment from Chuck Lorre. Do you know who Chuck Lorre is? Chuck Lorre is one of the producers of things like The Big Bang Theory. And this occurs if you watch programs like that. At the very end of the program, for about 3 seconds, some commentary that he felt like writing occurs on your television screen. This is a photo of one of his. Now, you could take this as a certain kind of rant, but it expresses the problem very well, I think. People prefer to be right. Right feels good, it's empowering. Wrong feels awful, and this is by design. Evolution rewards being right and punishes being wrong. The foraging monobrows who looked up from the berry bush and said, that's a predator, run away, had a better chance of passing on their genes than the alley-oops who said, no, it's just a big pussycat with an unfortunate overbite. They were more likely to become virgins tartar. In other words, wrong equals death. If you're wrong enough, you get excused from the planet. That explains why it's almost impossible to change people's minds. In order to have a shift in perspective, one must first admit to being wrong. That's extremely hard to do. History is filled with people who chose to cause unbelievable carnage rather than consider the possibility that they've misjudged a situation. I'm talking about you, Imperial Japan, Deutschland über alles, and the Confederate States of America, which is why I fear for our future. None of us are willing to be wrong. The very idea of it is inconceivable, unless, of course, some enlightened soul came along and proposed an alternative to the polarity of right and wrong. Perhaps the idea of neither, a middle way leading to peace, serenity, and joy. And if we were again to use history as a guide, we would most likely decide the enlightened one was wrong, then we would kill him, then we would worship him, then we would kill anyone who didn't agree that ours was the true faith, which would allow us to be righteous. I'm done.
Oh, thank you. I would just ask, I had a technical question. I'm glad that you went ahead and gave the summary or the your interpretation of the semantics of the meaning that accumulated. But I had one particular question with regard to the how you come to the conclusion that there was a contradiction. If you go back to I think it was the slide, the next to
Maybe
last
the
slide.
earliest slide where you had two fellows arguing about whether it was 3 or
No.
4.
No, you called it Penrose's triangle.
Penrose's triangle is, when we look at the drawing, appears like a real object, and then we investigate it and we find out it ain't real. And if you cover up some part of it, it is realistically drawn. But remarkably, it's realistically drawn for any cover up of any one of the 3 vertices of it.
And the reference for that is something that Roger Penrose wrote?
Oh, indeed it is. Penrose is very well aware of that, realistically drawn no matter which vertex you cover. He wrote a very interesting paper, if you're mathematically inclined, I can send it to you, called On the Cohomology of Impossible Figures.
Oh, I would love to see it. I would love to see it.
He uses Czech cohomology, and those locales that you see are neighborhoods that who together cover the whole figure, but they disagree with one another. The transition functions form a cocycle, and you get a non-trivial element in the Czech cohomology. I'm using jargon, but I thought
no, that's great. I think I grasped most of what you're trying to communicate there. So the issue then of the contradiction comes from the spatial interpretation.
Oh, of course it does,
in the
but
mind.
to your eye as well. Any contradiction you see in it has to do with what you interpret it.
So the question then, in terms of interpretation and the sensory relationship to the external world, is if you could not visualize, if you were not able to visualize that, and you just use your other senses, such as hearing or taste or smell or touch, could you come to the same contradiction?
Oh, a nice question, because this Penrose triangle and the things I was looking at is designed for looking at it, right? If I merely described to you how to draw it, I would be telling you how to make a drawing in the plane. But I am giving you a drawing, and then you have a program since early childhood of interpreting drawings as 3-dimensional things. And I'm actually working with your visual processing program and giving it something interesting, right?
I think you're extrapolating one step too far. You're not working with my visual processing.
Well, if I give it to you.
No, but you're working with the mathematical definition of the nature of 3 dimensions. In chemistry,
well, no, hold on a minute. We're both being too theoretical, probably.
Let me contribute something here, because
yeah, sure.
I think it's very, very interesting, your argument. And also, I will invite you, Lou, to consider this possibility. That is, if we can draw a new distinction between science 1 and science 2. You remember I promoted 4 different types of science. Science 1 is the physical sciences, everything your senses can get a direct interaction with. But the science 2 is purely in the mind of observer. So if we draw distinction there, then every example you used, your triangle and your strange thing with 3 here, 4 there, everything needs to be migrated into the science 2 area. They do not exist in science 1. Because
Wait, what is science one?
science one is the science that's trying to looking at the so-called truth or natural laws or facts, natural laws. But the science
So science one believes the myth that it's possible to have
science one
an objective fact.
Science one is all science one community trying to establish
There is no
considerable
science one.
fact.
Scientists have understood for a long, long time that their facts are structured by the way they observe.
Okay.
There is no science one.
I'll put it another way. Science one is that everybody can immediately agree upon a result of experimentation.
Ah, very good. So science one,
Okay.
hold on a minute.
Wait. That's not the point. That's
Yeah,
not
but
the
you're
point.
going to go too fast. I have to memorize your
The
terminology.
point
I want to
is
stay
the
with science one.
departure from one to two.
Yeah, I don't know what two is.
We
And by the
lost
time you
that.
define two,
Yeah.
I'm going to forget what one is. So go slow and let us comment.
See, if these two guys sitting in the opposite side of your strange Lou created object on the paper, and they only look at the three side, or another only at the four side. So their cognition system. Their cognition
You should allow me to comment, or else we're not getting anywhere. Let me comment.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I do it to slow you down also. Note that I said and demonstrated that each one isn't looking just at his end. He's looking at everything but the other guy's end.
Well, you mentioned
so my world as a liberal Democrat colors my whole world, not just some corner of my world.
That is my point, is that in the science two area, everything is constructed. Your little strange diagrams.
Oh, so your science two is extreme. It's radical constructivism.
No, it's science two start from psychology. So start from cognition. You see, I define science two as 6C: cognition, communication, conversation, consensus building. And
let me ask you another question then. In science one, all the people in the community agree that they'll basically only look at what they can agree upon communally, right? And the rest they keep their eyes away from. So, for example, that's the way we do science, normal science, so-called, in Western culture. We have always been ignoring things that we have no consensus on. And sometimes people assert that the things we have no consensus on don't exist. Other people say, well, we'll see, right? Now, isn't it true that in your science too, your community also wants to agree upon things, but they also agree upon the fact that there are different viewpoints in each of them and that they have to take that into account?
No, put it another way. In the area, in the field, in the football field of science one, people are fighting with each other for right versus wrong. So Lou is right, Jason is wrong, or Jason is right, Lou is wrong.
Well, but stop a minute. They have criteria about right or wrong. So if we get a report that somebody found that particles are traveling faster than light in the accelerator facility, then there's a question: is this right or is this wrong?
Maybe it was noise. Maybe we really. Please do falsification. Okay, so Einstein said, okay, you go there, observe that the light of the star, and well, you can prove if I was wrong. So then eventually they make agreement by doing experimentation.
Exactly.
No, in science two, there is no such agreement. So experimentation. So all you have to do is to say, okay, let's stop the game of right versus wrong. Can we
Well,
run
let me,
together?
I wanna ask you then, whether the following is an example of science too. I think it is. I gave a lecture many years ago to Herbert Brun and his group at Urbana, about the four-color theorem. I explained what I thought was a cybernetically interesting approach to proving the four-color theorem due to G. Spencer Brown, and I talked to it about it. And after I talked for half an hour, Herbert said to me, well, why don't you simply state that four colors suffice to color a map and be done with it? I think that's a good
That's an
example of
important
science.
phrase.
That's
A
an
question
example of
I
science
invented.
too.
I just invented this question, triggered by your wisdom. Can we run together? I mean, the little 4 and the 3 stuff. The two-person cannot make a resolution, so they can change the game. They can change the game. So let's redraw this stuff. Okay.
Oh, they
Let's
could draw
redraw this
something
stuff
else,
together.
or they could both step away and look at the whole.
No. Going to really Rom's catastrophic theory. You remember he drew the little curve thing, potential functions diagram, and
Yes,
he
yeah.
used the example of a dog. The dog facing a threat. So the dog can enter into the status of a fight, aggressive fight, or he can enter into the state of flight. Okay, I cannot deal with this. I run away. So that's just a dog. Cognition system interacting with that specific environment. And which one is more stable? The dog goes with that stable eigenvalue. Now, in the science 2 area, a group of people getting together, everybody had their pre-arranged mindset. So they have their agenda, their priority, their worldview. They're all different. Now, who is going to do the falsification experiment to make a consensus? Nobody can do that. But if they switch the paradigm, they say, okay, now we are now in science 2 area. Let's forget about the concept of truth. Let's forget about the concept of reality. Okay, we have a Lou reality here. We have a Jenny reality here. We have a Jason reality here. We have a Jerry reality here. And these realities are all totally different. So we have a multiple diversified reality. So the task becomes that, can we kind of manipulate our own reality a little bit so that we can create a shared reality? And that is science too. It's just
well, yeah, and you're still asking for a certain kind of agreement in that how can we mutually change in such a way that we come to an agreed upon reality?
With the pre-assumption is we want to become a community, or we are already a community.
Sure. So if you take that over.
In the situation, we do not have a community because we have a conflict interest group here.
So if you take
that becomes science 3.
If you take a political,
oh,
you're getting to science 3 now.
Yeah, that becomes science 3 is beyond one community. Beyond one community, you have opponents, and you have a win-lose situation. And your work is to make sure you win, or you have a better probability of winning, right? So that is the paradigm shift that we can rethink of our science stuff, and we see the limitation of.
But you will note that aspects of what you call science 2 are part and parcel of what people do in science 1. For example, all theoretical physicists would like to find a way to unify general relativity and quantum mechanics. and the attitude is, how can we recreate the theoretical physics, which is our viewpoints, so that these fit together? And at the level of working with theory, that is very much a science 2 enterprise.
I think that exactly means that both the theory of relativity and the quantum physics are at the two extremes of their territory. So in that territory, in that extreme, they lost
but
the
they are not
objectivity.
unrelated. They're not unrelated. For example, Hawking's work with black holes is a remarkable and deep computation involving both relativity and quantum mechanics, but it's one example. It isn't the whole ball of wax. And so people have, ever since that particularly, quite seriously working away at unification if they could find it.
Yeah, I think
And theorists sound like science 2 people to me. Dirac says, you know, from his philosophy, his viewpoint, better that it should be beautiful than that it should match experiment. Because he had the experience of finding that when he played with beautiful mathematics, he was able to discover true physics. So
yeah.
it gave him a larger creative arena.
Okay, I have no objection for that. I think at least in between the two extremes, science 1 works pretty good and established a huge area of engineering that can do good things for human societies. But so physics let them struggle with what's going on under quantum scale or
Well,
beyond.
we're only using physics as an example because we all know some of the stories about that community, and they are scientists.
The point is the example of physics is limited to only natural world. Well, as soon as we enter into human world.
But it is not so, because the results of the physics affect your human world and even destroy large populations in your human world.
Okay.
Can I interrupt something from the
Please.
biological point of view here? And go back to the original line, which my concerns were focused on, which are very specific parts of science 1. And this is the distinction of how we visualize objects. And
Jerry, you were talking about, could we do it without visualization? I just wanted to remark that.
Introduction. That was the introduction to it. Yeah, you're right. Your memory is perfect. But it was just my introducing you to a new line of reasoning, not necessarily new to you, but a different line of reasoning that is critical to the survival of life and actually the regeneration and reproduction of life. And this is a well-established phenomena of the relationships between light and matter. And this is the notion of the handedness of biomolecules. And the visualization of the handedness of biomolecules is dependent on locating in space where each of the atoms of the left-handed molecule is and where each of the atoms in the right-handed molecule is. And it's the establishing fact is that these are mirror images, and that the only way you can measure these differences is through quantum phenomena, that is the direction of rotation of light. And so that the reasoning here is very different from the sort of reasoning you use in 3 dimensions, because now you have to reason in terms of the atomic numbers. And so that was the grounding of my concerns. Now, I've changed from the language of mathematical physics to the language of mathematical chemistry. And this is a different language. And Jason's point of view is trying to accommodate between first and second orders of science, this sort of distinction that because he is grounded in his views of dynamics of René Thom, which is still, it's very fine mathematics, and no one's challenged Rene Thome's mathematics with regard to catastrophe theory. But this does not require catastrophe theory to have that change of form. And what catastrophe theory does, of course, is give you a change in form of the geometric relationships among the dynamical system, that is, the logical particles. But in the case of handedness, you're using exactly the same set of logical particles. You're just organizing them in a different way. And that is where the grounding of my thinking is. The handedness is, in rare cases, it can be determined from visualization. And here the reference is Pasteur, okay, 1864 or so. Whereas almost all handedness is only detectable by taste or smell, or by
Yeah, but
X-ray crystallography.
if you're a topologist, you can detect handedness of structures from codings of those structures in various ways. So it could be a
Yes.
certain graphical coding, it could be a certain string of symbols, and the handedness can be determined in terms of non-visual but related to visual information.
Algebraic types using real numbers,
Let's
not discrete numbers.
let's delay this discussion later.
I want to
let's hear the
let me make
presentation.
one further comment. I found it interesting that no one wanted to talk about being right and being wrong, which was my main point. I reiterated what I did last time, and then I said, yes, but I never talked about our great need to be right and its evolutionary basis, which is what Mr. Lohr expressed so well.
Let's try to make it one together.